I want to get straight to the artwork now, which, as Lindsay mentioned, is Shanequa Gay's Holding Space for Nobility, a memorial for Breonna Taylor in the Art and Space. So Lindsay, will you open the PowerPoint and navigate to the video? What we're going to do first is look at a 360-degree video of the art and space and the artwork inside it. And the reason is because this artwork is immersive. It takes up space on all 4 walls of the gallery. So Lindsay's going to play the video. We're going to watch it on loop a couple times because it goes by real quick. And while she's doing that, I'm going to play just the first minute of Shanequa Gay's description of the artwork so that you could hear her voice describing it as we look at it. So Lindsay, go ahead and press play.
Holding Space for Nobility, a memorial for Breonna Taylor. As I write this, we are now 125 days from the death of Breonna Taylor, a 26-year-old African ascendant living in America who was employed as an emergency medical technician. Taylor was fatally shot by Louisville Metro Police Department officers Jonathan Mattingly, Brett Hankinson, and Miles Cosgrove on March 13, 2020. And as of today, these officers have not been arrested nor charged for her murder. I would like to hold space for Breonna, for her spirit, for who she was as a human living and existing, as a woman, as a daughter, as a friend, as someone who was loved and is worthy of justice and being seen.
Okay, Lindsay, will you navigate to the first still image? Now been 319 days since the death of Breonna Taylor. We can look back at the 360-degree view as you wish. You can just let us know if you want to navigate back to that, just see what it looks like in this space. But for now, we're going to look at some still images. And before we even get to talking about the artwork, I want to direct your attention to the title, Holding Space for Nobility, a memorial for Breonna Taylor. And just thinking generally, when you think about memorials, what comes to mind? And anyone can jump in here at this point. It's more of a word association question.
I'd certainly say it's something left behind for others to reflect upon.
Something left behind. Dottie, did you want to say something?
Right, like a plaque or a monument of some sort.
A monument. Mm-hmm.
The life she lived and the life she lost.
Yeah, good. What else?
A passing.
A passing. Yeah. William, did you want to say something? I noticed that you posted in the chat. So thinking about a passing, a monument or a plaque, something left behind, something that encapsulates or speaks to what someone lived, the life they lived, the life they left behind. So I want to keep these thoughts in mind as we move forward and start to look at the art. So first thing, usually first thing we do when we look at a work of art in one of these Ackland classes is I ask students to take a visual inventory. And it's purely descriptive. It's just answering the question of what you see when you look at the work. So what do you see? What did you notice?
A zebra.
A zebra, good.
Black and white.
Black and white, the color. Mm-hmm.
Black objects on the floor.
Yeah, yeah. And I have a close-up of that. Lindsay, will you find that shot? Yeah. Black objects on the floor, good. What else did you notice?
I noticed that one of the walls is white. It's like there's nothing on one of the walls.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that might have been something, yeah, you saw in the video. Good.
Her hands appear to be welcoming in that phrase there. It's a welcoming gesture.
Yeah, so Brian's picking up now on some of the postures. Good. What else in this visual
The
inventory?
only time you see an animal like that, they're dead. They're in rigor mortis, right? The legs are sticking up.
Ah, okay, great. So Carlton is noticing something about the animals, the posture of the animals, and also something about maybe culturally embedded attitudes of animals. And we'll get to that in a moment. But anything else you noticed just in looking at the work? Any other descriptive elements?
There's another posture where it looked like the hands were up.
Yeah, Lindsay, can you find that image? So that's one of them. Mhm.
You know, in that image right there, you almost get the idea of antlers. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but you get a feeling that there's perhaps a tie-in with Christmas or something of that nature. I can't begin to interpret what this artist has done there, but it does seem to be something protruding from the head.
Yeah. So in seeing what makes you say that, yeah, you see sort of antler-like forms coming from the head. Yeah.
That seems kind of consistent on all of the bodies too, that Brianna's face is kind of in this silhouette of an antler-shaped head, some kind of animal with antlers.
Mm-hmm. An antler, we also saw a zebra, and also you notice that there's a sort of covering of her face, a kind of masking of her face and the way that her face is depicted. Good. Yeah.
Could those be guns on her head?
Say
Like
that-
they look like antlers, but could they be
Ah.
automatic weapons?
Ah, interesting. Yeah.
Especially the one on the left.
In Rome, there's a pretty well-known statue of Michelangelo. It's got the horns coming from it. I don't know if you heard about that, but it was a mistranslation of the Catholic Bible where a passage said Moses. It was actually the statue of Moses, and the mistranslation from the Catholic version talked about horns, and it's pretty famous. So Michelangelo took it literally, okay, and so they were ashamed of it, and they kind of put it to the side. But that's the first thing I thought of. Those horns are striking, and these are striking right here.
Absolutely. And you're getting to, Carlton, the cultural associations that we might have with horns or that we might have with antlers. And indeed, the cultural associations in this work are really multivalent. So let's get at some of those. When we think about, one animal mentioned was zebra, another animal mentioned was a deer or something with antlers. When we think about a deer, what are the qualities or attributes that you associate with deer?
The doe eyes.
Doe eyes, sort of innocent.
Being a deer in the headlight.
Oh.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say.
Being hunted, being just viciously hunted and run down.
Yeah, prey animal.
Prey animal.
And I kind of think about, like, when you're talking about antlers and deer and whatnot, I think about, mounting of like deer and animals into taxidermy on walls and whatnot as like a trophy.
Sort of trophy. So we're getting at kind of the negative cultural connotations that we have with deer, that they're vulnerable, that they're innocent, that they're to be hunted, that they're trophy. Are there any other associations that we make with deer? And what do you think when you see one?
They eat my garden.
They eat your garden. They're resourceful.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're eating themselves, and I certainly wouldn't imagine that Miss Gay is suggesting something of that nature. That'd be cannibalism, but it could be that the deer is being used for food.
Mm-hmm.
Not sure where she's going with that.
Mm-hmm. So let's, there are multiple associations that we have with deer. I'll get back to a little bit about what Shanequa Gay, the association she had with deer in a moment. But let's put those associations with deer on the table now and think now about zebra. What are the cultural associations that we have with zebra? And also, maybe a better question would be, how would you describe a zebra? What sort of creatures are they?
Well, the black and white,
Good, yeah,
sure.
An exotic creature.
exotic.
I mean, a zebra also is a prey animal. And I think like zebras and deers, when I kind of think of them, I think of them as animals that, people are encroaching on their like habitat and, taking space away from them, and removing them from, placing themselves in the spaces where, they were able to more freely roam.
Yeah, very well said. Yeah, absolutely.
Although I mean, I know lions take them down, but I mean, zebras, I mean, they take no prisoners, right? I don't think of them necessarily as being I think of them as a hunter more than the hunted, except for lions.
Yeah. So great point, Carlton, that there are multiple perspectives from which we might view these animals, the deer and the zebra, that Gay has chosen to create these kind of hybrid forms. So, one way to think about that would be, set aside our own kind of lived association of the deer and of the zebra and think about, okay, what sort of creatures are they? How do they move in the wild? What sort of behavior patterns do they show?
Well, one thing to note is that they are indigenous to the African continent. If they're not on the African continent, they're usually in captivity.
This one though is lying prostrate. That's an unusual position for them, isn't it? I believe that when an animal of that nature shows its belly, it's showing a sense of trust. And you don't see a zebra in this particular position. I wonder if there perhaps is some significance there, or if the zebra is merely lying on its back.
It's a great
or vulnerable.
Yeah, it's a great point you're bringing up, Brian, and also whoever it was that last spoke, that there are multiple ways that we can look at this figure. Shanequa Gay, in her descriptions of this artwork, she described the deer as it's a herd animal, and that means it's a community animal. It's an animal that prizes community above all else. And she shared the fact that informed her work that a zebra never goes to sleep without another of its kind nearby. And so perhaps that's a reading that might inform our understanding of the positioning that she's placed this zebra in. Similarly with deer, another way to describe them would be perhaps vigilant, agile, graceful. And so there's something that Gay is up to here. She's juxtaposing narrative and counter narrative in how we look at one particular aspect of the work. So let's think now about this idea of narrative and counter narrative with the postures of the figures. We've already talked about this figure. Lindsay, will you navigate to, yes, this image? How would you describe the postures of these figures?
The reverse postures.
Oh. Good.
The reverse postures, yeah.
The one on the left is with her palms open, is like welcoming or embracing.
Or explaining something.
Or explaining, yeah.
Yeah, kind of the outstretched hands, a kind of, a welcoming sort of signal. Good.
That's like the universal athletic position, where you're ready. It was the other one was, it's either praise or touchdown or hooray or something like that.
Oh, shoot.
Well, it reminds me of during some of the protests, the hands up, don't shoot, kind of chant and message that was going on.
Yeah, Chantel, absolutely. Hands up, don't shoot is one posture. And then hands outstretched in a kind of welcoming position, or as Carlton noted, the hands up could be a praise. So again, with both the postures and these kind of totemic figures, the deer and the zebra, we have multiple readings that change depending on our individual perspectives, and also, you know, where you might be situated in this actual in the art and space. Good. So now let's think again about someone pointed out the kind of vessels. Will you go navigate to an image of that, Lindsay? Maybe first the larger image and then the smaller. So that's the smaller one. Can we see? Yeah, great. So that's where it's positioned along the long wall in the room. And maybe look again at the smaller. So how would you describe these?
They all have pointy tops that would really hurt if you fell on them.
Yeah, I hadn't noticed that before.
Is that called hobnail glass?
So the name I have for it is it's Tierra Black hostess setting. Yeah.
Is that material from the Depression era? Is that Depression glass?
Actually, it's from the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's very delicate, very small. Everything else in the room is very large.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. Thanks very much for zooming in. Yeah, very delicate, very small. And as Brian said, it looks kind of antique. You know, it looks like it might be from an older era. Good. Yeah.
It looks more decorative than something you would use for function.
Say more. What makes you say that, Paige?
I think I can only imagine trying to hold those cups, and that texture looks pointy and uncomfortable to use as a glass. And then I can't quite make out what the larger vessels are that are kind of on that thin base. And if it's a vessel that would hold or contain some sort of material.
Like a candy dish.
Yeah.
Or like a funeral urn.
Or like a funeral.
Yeah, I was thinking like I forget the person's point about it not being used a lot. It's more like a formal kind of, to go with the image above, like maybe part of a memorial or some kind of formal ceremony. And are there like oils or things that would be stored in some of the larger, or like the water, like the on the far left, like pouring water over someone, like in an anointing way?
Makes you wonder, you know, sometimes art imitates life, or right. And I think I saw something like this at the British Museum. I may be wrong, but in one of the sections, and I know that some of the tribes where they would do like those what we would call self-mutilation, but it's like a rite of passage, and they would, you know, kind of, it would rump up the skin, and we would say, you know, that doesn't look so good right there, but it was considered beautiful. Is this harkening back to some part of, you know, quote unquote, darkest Africa? I don't know.
So,
well, Carlton, that's a great point. If I may
yeah, please go ahead.
jump onto that. You know, the self-flagellation of the Middle Ages was something that people did to sort of shed themselves of sins, if you will. And I wonder perhaps if that is somewhat related here.
So great points all. There's so much here, and these multiple associations again are embedded in the work that we're supposed to come away, you know, with the idea that these could have any number of meanings. So Carlton, I think you're referring to scarification, ritual scarification. So that's perhaps one association in thinking about the texture. And Carly has just pointed out that this looks like an altar. So that, again, there's another association with ritual, and it's not necessarily just rituals that are derived from the African continent, but also Western ritual practices too. Very good. Someone else, I think it was Paige, pointed out, and Chantel also pointed out, that these look like they could hold something, that they're vessels, they're objects that are typically instrumentalized. You know, we think about a vase or a cup as just something that we use, that it's an object to be instrumentalized, to be exploited to our own ends. But there are other ways to think about objects. objects as imbued with a ritual power and possessing their own agency. So again, there's this sort of bifurcated view of an object that is exploited, that is murdered, that is instrumentalized, and objects that have political power and agency and expression. So I wanted to answer the question about what is in these. These vessels are holding salt water.
Oh.
Yeah. What associations do you have with salt water?
Ears.
Ears.
Yeah.
Plasma.
Plasma. William, you have your hand up.
Yes, I was going to notate. They look. Does anyone remember Brock candy?
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
remind me of the candy dishes my grandmother used to have.
Yeah.
So they were a vessel of sweetness.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Other associations with salt water?
Swimming.
Swimming.
Going to the beach.
Going
Yeah.
to the beach. Yeah.
Salt water kind of makes me think of the transatlantic slave trade as
Yeah.
well, with bodies being transported across the ocean.
Mm.
You know, it's a really fascinating point, Lindsay, because Shanequa Gay described this work as speaking to the past and the future. And so, yeah, there is a reference to the very material history of African Americans in this country. Yeah. Someone else, I think to William's point, thinking about, okay, what sort of vessels are these? Where do they come from? I think Brian, you had asked, like, what decade were they from? So their Tierra Black is the type of dishware that they are. And this was a style that was very popular in the 70s and 80s when Shanequa Gay was growing up. Her women relatives would put out dishes that looked like this for special occasions. So it performs another kind of ritual function for hosting, for inviting people into your space. So I want to ask, we talked a little bit about our general ideas about memorials and what we typically think of when we think about memorials. We talked about that a little at the beginning. So in thinking about this work and the aspects that we've discussed so far, how is this work similar or different from those other examples of memorials? And maybe at this point, Lindsay, can you go again to a larger view?
I was just thinking of like the Abraham Lincoln, like, I don't know the full term, I'm sorry, I can't think of it right now, but I'm from DC and like we would go there a lot, you know, and it's just like a huge version of him, but it's him in like a realistic sense. So I think most of them are like them, how they looked in real life, but you know, Breonna Taylor wasn't a zebra. I also think of Stone a lot, like, you know, yeah.
Yeah, stone, large life, monumental. And this is monumental, but in a different way, yeah.
I think about memorials as being a celebration of life. Or like I'm always going to memorial services. And that's what more I was thinking of. Like it's more a tribute to her life and that those things were part of her life. I'm not sure about all the rest. I'd have to think about it. But that I have a different interpretation of memorial than I think we were talking about. But that's how I think of memorials.
But actually, Carol, your point is very prescient because you were thinking of memorials as an activity, as something that we do, as a place that we go. And this work, a memorial for Breonna Taylor, is also something that we do, a place that we go. We're viewing it on a screen now, but we're talking about it. We're conducting activity around it. And if you decide to go and visit this work, because the Ackland is now open, it would be an activity, it'd be something that you do, a space that you visit. Megan, I think you were going to say something.
I was just going to say that I think that when I think of memorials, kind of similar to this, I think of more color and something that's a celebration of life instead of, you know, black and white. And I feel like a lot of art that you see memorializing individuals who have, you know, lost their lives to police brutality, that you think of like more colored and a celebration of who they were, and not necessarily taking such a stark view of obviously what has tragically happened, their senseless killing. And so I feel like this is, like this is, not the thing that you would normally think of when you think of that idea of the world of memorial and how you memorialize an individual.
Yeah, not.
I look at it differently. These two depictions on the wall are happy. She looks to be like in shock, or like, are you ready for the trauma here? And, to me, this looks like, a dead animal, and I can say this is one of the three males on this, but, is this something about male aggression? This looks like there's an incipient sexual assault happening here. And I know that, the story isn't just the male policeman that shot her, but, the first, I think it's just the life was a tragedy. That first, I don't know all the details, I forgot, but it struck me. Why is a nice girl like this stuck with such a loser that she was? The one that was, running the drugs in the first place, and then the confusion, and the second guy, why does he even have a gun? And she, I just think of her as being vulnerable, a smart gal that was going places that had bad choice in men, and and that's how this whole tragedy unfolded. But I don't know. Does anyone else see that?
So Carlton's identifying kind of an intersection of patriarchal power and white supremacy, kind of at work in the.
Well, not necessarily white supremacy, because the policeman that shot her, that's one thing, but then the first boyfriend, he did her no favors at all either, right? I got a daughter, and I wouldn't want her mixed up with an unsavory character. Maybe that's just me being overprotective, but I don't know if it's white supremacy. It's just, lawlessness. That first boyfriend of hers was a real character. I don't know. I'm just guessing. Is this
can I say something? I just think she's been reincarnated. And a lot of this is her reincarnation, so that her memory will live on, and they say, remember her. And so they are trying to revitalize her memory in a different form and a stronger form, so that it can endure the test of time.
I think that's it's very eloquently put, Neris. Thank you for that. And I'll one other way to consider these hybrid figures of animal and Breonna Taylor's image is also a term and a practice that comes up a lot in Shanequa Gay's work. She calls these fictional hybrid figures devouts, and their embodiment of African ascendant womanhood and also these totem animals. She doesn't always use a zebra and a deer. She sometimes uses a vulture and other animals that have multiple associations that could be read as creative or destructive. Just as Carlton pointed out, it seemed like a violent sort of image of her sort of lying on her back. This figure could also be read as like a godlike, a deity-like creature that possesses its own power. And that gets back again to what we were talking about with the vessels, that there are multiple ways to read this, and kind of the ambivalence of the work is part of the discomfort some of us might have with it. Did someone want to say something? Okay, yeah, go ahead. No, okay.
The slightest pushback I would have about the reincarnation, we're supposed to be friends here, so just
yeah.
I do remember seeing part of the funeral, and it was a proper Christian burial, and that's just not part of Christian history with reincarnation. So I'm not, I don't know. I mean, it's a thought, but that I think she had a proper Christian burial. That would be my thinking, my remembrance.
Can I say it's deeper than that? It's nothing to do with religion. It's to do with spirituality, which is transcends all religions and all races.
So very well put. Yeah, Shanequa Gay, in her descriptions of this work, she described it as spiritual. as something that is borrowing from and is influenced by multiple types of spiritual practice. And Carlton, you're right. So Shanequa Gay, she was raised in the Christian church. And so some of these references to outstretched hands, those are Christian references, but she also makes references to Indigenous American and also Indigenous African religions too.
Right.
So in thinking again about the title, oh, sorry, William, did you have your hand up?
Yes. Is spirituality, is eternal life not a spiritual or religious concept?
It's a cultural concept.
Well, eternal life transcends the mortal and the material.
The cultural concept.
Is that not what reincarnation is, the form of eternal life?
It depends on your perspective.
Which is kind of the point of this whole session and series. I wanted to return just in our last few minutes here to the idea of holding space, which is part of the title, and ask, what does it mean to hold space, and in what ways do you see this work as holding space? If you see this work as holding space.
I feel like for me personally, like I've been in the art and space in many different incarnations, and that this feels like one of the more stark versions of it, and that it's allowing you the ability to truly just be with the piece in that gallery. I don't know if it's like this because, obviously we haven't had as many people, like you haven't been able to go into the museum, but so often the space has been used, and you've had students and you've had colorful furniture, and it's been a place in which there's been a lot of activity, and this feels like a space that would be, even if it was, if everything was normal and we were open to the fullest capacity, that this still feels like a space that would be more in that memorial setting, more able to be in there and as Neris had mentioned, have kind of like that, it's like that spiritualness of it, being in this space that feels like you can connect with Brianna and like who she was, and not only her, but like her and the many other women who are like her.
Yeah, I was thinking something similar of just, I think it's interesting that this is kind of a 2D exhibit, except for those like smaller pieces. So there's like literally like a lot of space to just be filled for you to be in there and move around, or like, yeah, outside of COVID, multiple people being able to be in that space with one another and have that memorial, because it's not like an actual statue of her or anything like that.
I think that's really well put, Carly, that this, even during COVID, and the museum just opened today, but even during COVID, we can still be 6 feet apart from each other in this space and still experience the work. So it's communal in that way. Lindsay, did you want to say something?
Yes, I did, just as possibly one of the few people on this call who's had the pleasure of being in the museum last week as we prepared to reopen and get to experience this piece. Seeing it in person, being in the room, it really, a lot of the things y'all said, the eyes really stuck out to me personally. I felt everywhere I turned, there was her gaze, and it was really powerful. And I do think we're fortunate that there is no furniture, that there, apart from the white counter and the projector that permanent pieces of the room, it's entirely dedicated to this installation. So if you do feel safe, obviously, please come to the museum and spend some time with this work. I definitely encourage it.
The museum is the safest place in Chapel Hill to go. I mean, there's nobody in it. And and you just can have the whole place to yourself. Neris and I were there last week.
Yeah, we've seen it. We've been there.
And some of the other docents had been in, and they said they were just blown away by it. They really, really were amazed by it. So I think it has a real impact when you go in that room.
Yeah.
It's easy to get.
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah, and Carol, your description of your experience in the space leads me to what I think will be my last question. So the experience of being in a museum alone or almost alone, or maybe with just a few people, the experience of seeing this work leads me to ask the question, how does and how can the museum function as a ritual space, as a healing space? Thinking about this work that Shanequa Gay was interested in speaking to past, present, future. Does a work like this imagine a possible future for the museum's memory work?
I think all museums have that quality. It doesn't hinge on this alone. I think all objects have their own life and they have their own associations. Some of your sculptures that go back to, ancient India, I mean, they all have the spiritual quality. So this is in keeping with your collection. Right. And it's a more modern version of what people have been reflecting through different art forms for centuries and generations.
I think they're also she's encouraging us to find space in our lives for Brianna and for going into the future that we cannot forget. And this is one of the ways to help us remember.
And too, the grieving process is vital. In one of her interviews, Gay said, she sees this work, both her creation of it and the installation of it and our experience of it as a kind of ritual. She sees it as a kind of ritual, and the grieving is an important ritual process. Yeah. Other thoughts on the museum function as a ritual?
I think going to the museum is a ritual in itself, and having respect for the objects, having respect for various artworks. And, there is a line in front of paintings, you don't cross it. It's in some countries, more people go to museums than they do to places of worship. So, so it's a house of culture, as are lots of religious houses. So it's, it depends on what people choose to do. It's to do with choice.
Is there any significance to the table or shelf that's on the left side of the screen?
I don't think so. Lindsay might be able to speak to that more directly, but I think that's just a piece of furniture that's in the space.
Okay.
That Shanequa Gay, she painted over and decided to incorporate it. Yeah. Megan, I noticed you unmuted. Did you say something?
Oh, I was just going to say, something similar to what Naris had said, that, a museum can just be that place, that a lot of museums can be that place where you can find some type of connection in various forms and fashions. And that, I think that one of the great things about the Ackland is that it's a space that is not too big, and it allows you the chance to connect with so much in a really good way. So you don't feel necessarily overwhelmed by the objects that are on view in the collection. And it's just, I'm glad that you guys are opening back up, because it's just such a great place to be and to kind of center yourself and to be inside those spaces, because there's just so much to be told from the story of the pieces that are on view.
Well, one thing I want to reiterate just as we close and thinking about this work, I know we'll all continue to keep thinking about it and keep thinking about Breonna Taylor, is that museums historically and the present are ways of illuminating and showing and displaying what we find valuable as a culture. And Breonna Taylor, or excuse me, Shanequa Gay's work also illuminates in just looking at what we find valuable, what we see as possessing agency and power, and what we do not see as having agency and power. And just in the varied ways that we read animals, that we read vessels, that we reread water. So this work, as I see it, is a means of reconfiguring and illuminating how we define what is powerful and what is valuable, just as the work the museum does. Are there any questions or final thoughts that people want to leave us with?
How long is this going to stay up?
Oh, Lindsay, do you have the date on that?
Yes, through July 4th is the current plan.
Because, you know, you're not open on a Sunday. I run a youth group and I really would like to, Frank Gallery youth group, and the fact you're not open on a Sunday is a problem for me because I think the kids I teach would really resonate with this, but Saturday is not a good time for them. So I think if you get children in again, I think this is something they need to see.
I think that sounds like a great idea, and I will definitely share that with Jenny, who I know you know well, and perhaps maybe we can arrange for special viewing hours for the group to come. I totally agree.
Yeah, I mean, it's really something that I think young people should see. Yeah.
We're at the end of our time. I want to thank you all. These discussions are always so enjoyable and so educational for me, but especially this one. So thank you all so much. And we at the Ackland are happy to take any feedback about this close look session or any others. And I think there's a question in the chat about other programs related to this installation that maybe Lindsay can help answer.
Yes, sorry, I was just throwing a few links in the chat. The first one's the artist's website, and you'll find that some of her other works involving these hybrid forms do involve color. So that's an additional point to ponder as you explore the rest of her work. And then as far as programs this spring, we have, I've just linked to it, Close Looks that Erin mentioned in the beginning, that we have some reactions from Chapel Hill community members, different videos and things like that, and a recording of an artist talk that happened this past fall with the artist Shanequa Gay herself, which is absolutely enjoyable. And I know some of us were there virtually the first go round. So we'll definitely take feedback if you guys are interested in talking more about the themes and the artist technique. And thank you so much for joining us this evening. And I hope everyone has a good rest of their evening. And if you have any questions about reserving tickets to see the Ackland, feel free to email me because I'm your girl.
Thank you so much, both of you. You did a great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.